Okay, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on the European Green Deal. I am Anne-Sophie, and I will be your speaker today. So today's webinar is a global and generic presentation to guide you through the Green Deal and its regulatory tsunami. We're not going to go into each regulatory proposal and their requirement precisely, but we will see today what the Green Deal is and the sectors that are impacted. Of course, if you need or want to dig deeper into a specific point or sector, do not hesitate to contact us for more information. We'll have all the contact information at the end of this webinar. So today we will be talking first a bit about TÜV Sud and with a small presentation, then a presentation of the Green Deal, then the policy areas of the Green Deal, and finally we will see some examples to make it more concrete. So TÜV Sud is a major global player in the TIC industry, meaning testing, inspection, and certification, with a headquarters in Munich in Germany and a global network in 1,000 locations in about 50 countries. With our extensive network of multidisciplinary experts, accredited laboratories, and offices in the world's major business hubs and key production centers, we are ready to support your need for safety, security, and sustainability wherever you do business. For that matter, we will see the services that we can offer. First, the training. We support people and organizations to enhance performance through a wide range of work safety, technical management systems, executive training programs, and certified qualification. About inspection, we independently verify that at every stage, your systems, processes, and procedures comply with the relevant codes, requirements, regulation, and standards. We also do advisory. We provide advisory on a wide range of topics from quality, safety, and risk to environmental protection, regulatory requirements, and process optimization. We also audit and certify management systems for all industries, ensuring your value chain complies with requirements for quality, performance, and IT security according to international, national, and other relevant standards. And finally, of course, about testing and product certification, we provide internationally accredited independent product testing services in accordance with international standards through a global network of testing laboratories. Okay, now let's talk about our topic of the day, the Green Deal. Before starting, here is just an overview of a mind map of the Green Deal, and here you can see the first level. If we go further in each topic with the strategies, here the mind map. And on this slide, you can see how complex and complete this project is and impact sectors with all the proposals and the regulations that will apply in each sector. The idea today is to give you a global vision of the European Green Deal. So, what is the European Green Deal? Introduced during the World Climate Summit at the end of 2019, also known as the COP25 in Madrid, the European Green Deal is an ambitious action plan developed to enable Europe to face climate change and environmental degradation. So the 27 states committed to making Europe the first carbon neutral continent by 2050 compared to the level of 1990. Here, what is important is to note that this is an action as the continent as a whole and not of each state. It addresses the following priorities: a clean energy supply, and increasing the value given to improving human health, to sustainable use of resources, and to protecting and restoring the natural environment. It is based on different legislative tools. So there are, of course, European regulations and directives, but also global strategies, including economic incentive measures to build the overall framework in each respective policy areas. In addition, you will also, for instance, find research and development programs as part of these projects and a huge mechanism of financing. I will come back on this point later. So how did it start? Actually, it all began in the 2015 Paris Conference on Climate Change. It is the 21st Conference of the Parties, that is why it is called the COP21, to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So in order to fight against climate change, the 195 countries present at this international summit formed an agreement known as the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit the rise in global temperature way below 2 degrees and to continue efforts up to 1.5 degrees. This objective requires achieving zero net carbon dioxide emission between 2050 and 2070. And it is in this context that the European Green Deal was born. To understand a bit better why the target is 1.5 degrees, here are some graphs and figures. So on this slide, you can see the three scenarios of global temperature rising according to the greenhouse gas emission levels depending on the applied policies. So if we keep going with our implemented policies, the greenhouse gas emission will continue to increase and the global temperature will uncontrollably increase, reaching up to 3.5 degrees. Depending on the policies applied, we will be able to reduce our greenhouse gas emission to a greater or lesser extent and thus limit global warming to between 1.5 and 2 degrees. As you can see here, limiting to 1.5 degree would require a huge effort. Concrete and show you really the consequences. Here are some graphs about the scenario. So at the top on this slide, you can see a thermometer with first the indication that the decade 2011-2020 is already 1.1 degree warmer than the period 1850-1900 and then you have the temperature of the different scenario. To understand these images, let's take the example of Australia. With the best scenario of a rising of 1.5 degrees, the annual hottest day temperature will be between 1.5 and 2.5 degrees higher than 1900, while the annual wettest day will be around 10% higher. On the other hand, with the worst scenario of an increasing of 4 degrees, the annual hottest day temperature will rise by 6 degrees and the annual wettest day will be around 20% higher. One of the obvious consequences here will be that the soil will be drier with greater quantities of water to absorb at once. But this temperature change will also have a significant impact on natural and human systems. If we take again the example of Australia, with the most favorable scenario, the risk of species losses stays between 0 and 0.1%, while the maize yield and the fisheries yield stay quite similar. Whereas with the worst scenario, the risk of species losses is around 10%, while the maize yield and the fishery yields decrease by 30%. So it is therefore in order to stick to the most favorable scenario that the Green Deal was initiated in 2019. So here I will show you the timeline of the Green Deal with the most important steps allowing to reach the climate neutral targets. So first, about the creation of the law. in December 2019, the Commission presents the European Green Deal, committing to climate neutrality by 2050. In March 2020, the Commission proposes European climate law to write 2050 climate neutrality target into binding legislation, while in September 2020, the 2030 climate target plan was presented. In April 2021, a political agreement was reached on European climate law by European Parliament and Member States. And in June 2021, the European climate law enters into force, including strategies, action plans, and alliance on its main topics. So, the final climate goals are a reduction of emissions of at least 55% compared to 1990 levels. This goal came with a package of regulations appeared in 2021, known as the Fit for 55, and I will also come back about this point later within this webinar. And of course, finally, we have in 2050 the EU becoming climate neutral. Now, let's have a look about the policy areas of the Green Deal. I will present the main sectors where the Green Deal is rewriting the rules to place them in a sustainable and resilience logic. First of all, the climate, with a high level of EU climate ambition for 2030 and 2050, a clean, affordable, and safe energy supply, the acceleration of the transition of sustainable and smart mobility, an efficient use of energy and resources in construction and renovation, the achievement of a healthy and environmentally friendly food system, finances oriented to a green economy, a more respectful industry that will meet the challenge of the digital and ecological transition, and finally, a fundamental pillar, preserving the environment and biodiversity, thanks in particular to a more circular economy and better resource management. So first, a few words about the context within the climate sector. The main driver of climate change is the greenhouse effect. Many of greenhouse gases occur naturally, but human activities are increasing the concentrations of some of them in the atmosphere. As you can see here on the graph, the emissions of greenhouse gas have been dramatically increasing for the past 50 years. And in 2022, there is an increase of 49% in total greenhouse emissions from human-derived emissions of these gases compared to 1990. That is why the climate law I presented earlier will strongly impact many different sectors to significantly reduce all the sources of greenhouse gas emissions. The realizations of these objectives will translate into tangible benefits for European citizens and the EU, including an improved air quality, some reduced healthcare expenses, the creation of sustainable and local job opportunities, the availability of more eco-friendly food, and an increased energy security. Here are just some examples of all the benefits that will comes from the Green Deal. Now, if we have a look at the key action within this sector, there is, of course, the EU climate law regulation, an adaptation strategy, climate diplomacy, some protection of the ozone layer, the measures about fluorinated greenhouse gases, the revision of the regulation on land use change and forestry, and the revision of the effort sharing regulation. Now let's have a look at the energy sector. Over the 3/4 of the European Union greenhouse gas emissions are linked to the creation and the consumption of energy. It is thus imperative to significantly reduce the carbon footprints of the EU's energy system to meet the climate goals set for 2030 and 2050. To initiate a transition to a cleaner energy with the twin goals of lowering greenhouse gas emissions and improving the well-being of EU residents, the European Green Deal centers around three core principles. Ensuring a stable and cost-effective energy supply for the EU, establishing a fully integrated, interconnected, and digitally optimized energy market within the EU, and placing a strong emphasis on energy efficiency, enhancing and transitioning towards a power sector that mainly relies on renewable energy sources. The key actions within the energy sector are Repower EU and Clean Energy Transition that will include an energy system integration strategy, a hydrogen strategy, a solar energy strategy, a methane strategy, an offshore renewable energy strategy, and the revision of the Trans-European Network for Energy. Now, if we take a look at the transport sector, so first a few words of context with figures that will well illustrate the place and impact of transport in Europe. So transport represents over 10 million jobs in Europe with 210,000 kilometers of railway lines, 52,000 kilometers of waterways, and 49 airports that each welcome more than 10 million passengers per year. This sector is actually supported by the establishment of the single market in 1992. Indeed, the establishment of a European transport area is seen as essential to achieving the free movement of people and goods. That is a crucial point for Europe. However, it comes with associated social costs, including the release of greenhouse gases and pollutants, noise pollution, road accidents, and traffic congestions. Currently, transport-related emissions account for roughly a quarter of the EU's total greenhouse gas emissions, and these emissions are increasing year after year, as you can see on the graph here, with just an increase for the COVID-19. So to achieve the targets of the Green Deal, substantial changes in the transport sector are imperative. A well-defined roadmap has been put in place to accomplish a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions originating from transportation, always by 2050. The key actions rely on a sustainable and smart mobility strategy and connecting Europe Express. Now about buildings. The building sector is the economic sector that consumes the most energy and the second most emitter of greenhouse gas in industrial countries. Besides, most of the energy deployed in the buildings is used to heat or to cool it. It is therefore essential to renovate buildings as well as to revise the energy standards for the next generation of buildings to make them energy efficient and using fewer resources. This strategy will show some additional benefits, actually, such as health and better indoor comfort levels, green jobs, to the economy and the society. The key goals will be upgrading buildings through renovation, achieve a highly energy efficient and decarbonized building stock by 2050, reducing the carbon footprint of heating and cooling systems, and addressing energy poverty and upgrading the least energy efficient building. This strategy will rely on the renovation wave, and the energy efficient buildings that include the proposal for a revision of the energy performance of building directive and the proposal for a directive on energy efficiency amending the current directive. Now a few words about the agriculture. So first, let me give you the definition of sustainable diet according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Sustainable diets are diets with low environmental impacts that contribute to food and nutritional security and healthy lives for current and future generations. Sustainable diets help protect and respect biodiversity and ecosystem, are culturally acceptable, economically fair and accessible, affordable, nutritionally safe and healthy, and optimize natural and human resources. The Green Deal here aims to guarantee a sustainable diet and agriculture all over the Europe and being a global example. So the objectives include ensuring food security in light of geopolitical uncertainties, climate variations, and the decline of biodiversity, diminishing the environmental and climate impacts of the EU's food system, enhancing the resilience of the EU food system, and pioneering a global shift toward competitive sustainability across the entire food supply chain. The key actions here are the Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plans. Here it is the reform. The evaluation of the EU Agri-Food Promotion Policy, the Organic Farming Action Plan, and the quite famous Farm to Fork strategy. Now, a few words about sustainable finances. To achieve the targets set by the European Green Deal, the Commission has committed to mobilizing at least 1 trillion sustainable investment over the next decades. This money actually comes from 5 different sources. First, the European budget. The European Commission wants 25% of the EU budget to contribute to achieving the objectives of the Green Deal, and this will represent 503 billion euros over 10 years. Then there are public and private investments. A great interest will also be given to the new Invest EU program, and it would make it possible to mobilize 279 billion euros of private and public investments linked to climate and the environment between 2021 and 2030. Then there is the national co-financing. Actually, member states should add around 114 billion euros to this pot, since projects benefiting from European structural funds are partly co-financed at national, regional, or local level. Finally, there is also the money coming from the carbon market recipe, with the money generated by the EU emissions trading systems and the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism that will provide around 25 billion of the EU laws transition. In addition, there is the creation of a Just Transition Fund proposed to the 2021-2027 budget proposal. It is itself part of the Just Transition mechanism. So operating by leverage, this fund is intended for the regions furthest behind in the energy transition. The idea is that by granting 7.5 billion euros to this fund, the EU hopes that at least 100 billion euros will be mobilized over 7 years and 151 billion euros over 10 years. The key actions within the finance sectors are the Next Generation EU, the Just Transition Mechanism I was just mentioning, the Sustainable Finances Strategy that include the Taxonomy Regulation and the CSRD Directive, the revision of the Social Climate Fund, and the Green Transition Reform Support. Now let's have a look at the industrial sector. The European Green Deal represents the EU's fresh approach to growth, aspiring to reshape the EU into a more equitable and prosperous society. It envisions a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy that achieves a state of net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. The primary objective is to tap into the substantial potential within global markets for low-emission technologies and sustainable goods and services, with, of course, the ultimate aim of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. Nevertheless, realizing a climate-neutral and circular economy necessitates the full engagement of the industrial sector. It means that all industrial value chains, including those in energy-intensive industries, will play a crucial role here. The new industrial strategy for Europe will spearhead both the green and digital transformations, enhancing Europe's global competitiveness even further. Let's have a look at the key actions here. So there is the European Industrial Strategy, some alliances that have been set up. We will find the Circular Plastics Alliance, the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, the European Raw Material Alliance, and the European Battery Alliance. There is also the Green Deal Industrial Plan for the Net Zero Age. And finally, the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and the Emission Trading System regulations that encourage cleaner industrial production. These are the two regulations I was mentioning earlier within the finance sector. Now let's have a look at the environmental sector. That is actually a huge pillar, so we will also find four main parts here. Let's start with the Circular Economy Action Plan. The European Commission adopted the new Circular Economy Action Plan in March 2020. It is one of the main building blocks of the European Green Deal. It aims to make the commercial products more sustainable through their entire life cycle. The goal here is thus to limit the consumption and waste of resources, the greenhouse gas emission, and the productions of waste within their consumption, production, use, and end of life. The upcoming action plan is set to roll out initiatives with the following objectives: to make sustainable products the norm in the EU, strengthening the influence of consumers and public buyers, concentrating efforts on sectors that heavily consume resources, minimizing waste generation, ensuring that circular practices benefit individual regions and urban areas, and finally, taking the lead in global initiatives to promote a circular economy. The key actions within the Circular Economy Action Plan are a sustainable product policy framework, a focus on key product value chains, where we will find electronical and electrical products, batteries, textiles, packaging, construction materials, vehicles, plastic products, and food, water, and nutrients. Then there are some cross-cutting actions, a focus on less waste for more value, support of the circular economy transition, and leading efforts at a global level. Now about the Zero Pollution Action Plan. The 2050 vision of zero pollution aims to bring down level of air, water, and soil pollution to a point where they no longer pose a threat to health and natural ecosystems. The goal here is to create an environment free from toxins, staying within the limits that our planet can sustain. This vision is translated into specific targets for 2030, concentrating on accelerating the reduction of pollution at its source. So within these targets, you will find reduce by more than 55% the health impacts, meaning premature deaths of air pollution, reduce plastic litter at sea by 50% and release of microplastic into the environment by 30%, reduce nutrient losses by 50% and use of fertilizer by 20%, and reduce by 25% the EU ecosystems where air pollution threatens biodiversity. Here, the key actions will be the Zero Pollution Action Plan for water, air, and soil, a chemical strategy for sustainability that will have an impact on many regulations such as REACH, CLP, POP, or any other relevant regulation, and the revision of measures to address pollution from large industrial installations. Now about waste and recycling. First, to give you some context, here are some figures. There are 2.2 billion tons of waste that are generated each year in the EU. And in 2021, 49.6% of household waste was recycled or composted, with a target of 60% reuse and recycling municipal waste by 2030. The share of landfills in the EU fell from 24% in 2017 to 18% in 2020, and the goal is to reduce waste sent to landfill to 10% by 2035. However, in 2021, EU waste exports to third countries reached 33 million tons. This is an increase of 77% compared to 2004. So here the figures are very elevated. The EU's waste policy strives to safeguard both the environment and human health, acting as a catalyst for the EU shift toward a circular economy. It establishes specific objectives and targets to enhance management of waste, foster innovation in recycling practices, restrict the disposal of waste and landfills, and oversee and regulate international waste shipments. As we could see here, this is a huge point. The waste and recycling strategy will focus on construction and demolition waste, end-of-life vehicles, biodegradable waste, mining waste, packaging waste, waste containing POPs, disposal of PCBs and PCTs, air OHS regulation, waste from E&E equipment, sewage sludge, waste oil, and ships. And there will be, of course, a revision of the EU Waste Framework Directive. So this is a very global approach. Now, a few words about preserving biodiversity. The EU's 2030 biodiversity strategy is an extensive and forward-looking blueprint designed to safeguard the environment and counteract the decline of ecosystems. This strategy seeks to restore Europe's biodiversity by 2030, promoting the well-being of people, the climate, and the planet. It also aims to build resilience against potential future challenges, including adverse effects of climate change, forest fires, insecurity in supply chain, and outbreaks of disease with a focus on safeguarding wildlife and combating illegal wildlife trade. If we have a look at the key action about preserving biodiversity, there is the Biodiversity Strategy for 2030 with a nature restoration plan and an EU soil strategy, the common fisheries policy, and the blue economy strategy. Now that we've seen the main impacted sectors, I will show you some examples to give you a more concrete view of the Green Deal. First, the Fit for 55 package. In September 2020, under the European Climate Law, the EU updated the 2030 emissions targets of 55% from the former 40% emission reduction targets because former policy framework was insufficient. The Fit for 55 package of legislation makes all sectors of the EU's economy fit to meet this target. It sets the EU on a path to reach its climate targets in a fair, cost-effective, and competitive way. The Commission argues that to support implementation across sectors would make European industry and businesses pioneer. This is expected to modernize the economy, delivering innovation and a competitive edge, while ensuring security and resilience of energy supplies and health benefits. This package is actually a great example of the synergy between the measures taken in the different policy areas to reach an emission reduction target. So to implement the increased ambition, in July and December 2021, the Commission presented the first regulations, the first proposal actually, under the Fit for 55 package. So I will show you here the package that contains legislative proposals in finance sector, energy sector, agriculture sector, transport, and building. Here is an example of how regulations will impact consumer goods in their life cycle. So here is another example of how the Green Deal can have a concrete impact in European citizens' everyday life or in industrial and companies. So there will be some legislation on the raw materials itself. So here it is not an exhaustive list, it's just examples that can apply on each state of the life cycle. Then you will have the regulation that apply during the production. Here examples of regulation that will impact the product use. And finally, of course, some regulation that will impact the end of life of the products. But actually, the company will also be impacted on its everyday life with some regulations, like here, for instance, the CSRD directive and the taxonomy regulation. So today we've seen a global approach of the Green Deal. I thank you very much for attending this webinar and for your attention. If you have any question, please feel free to reach us. Here are our contact information. We will be glad to answer or to support you on your way of compliance. I thank you very much. Have a good day.